Good evening. My name is Jeff Keithley. I will be your moderator and timekeeper tonight. I'm a member of the Alliance for Democracy and I live in Pender Harbor. You will all see an automated text, it will be automated text generated at tonight's discussion, which Naomi has just gone through. This wonder of Zoom technology allows us to make the debate accessible for hearing impaired people. Tonight's all-candidate debate via Zoom is taking place on Monday, August 30th, 2021 from 7 to 9, and it's coming to you from across the entire Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country federal riding. Today is day 16 of a 36-day campaign, and the candidates are already tired, and we thank them for their stamina. We strongly encourage everyone to get out and vote for the candidate and party of your choice. I just got something blocking my screen. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we live on and among the traditional and unceded territories of the Lil'wat Nation in and around Pemberton and Whistler, the Shishalh Nation on the Sunshine Coast, the Squamish Nation from the lower Sunshine Coast to Squamish and West and North Vancouver, which in turn overlaps with the Musqueam First Nation extending to the Fraser River estuary. To all four First Nations in our riding, we honor and respect your storied histories, and we thank you for your hospitality and for your grace. We also acknowledge that many people have preferred pronouns, so please feel free to add them when you sign in. We want to thank the Alliance for Democracy and the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association for organizing tonight's debate, which will deal with the global existential theme, the climate and the environment. Now, I'm going to turn this back to Naomi, who's going to go over some of the technical details for those who are just signed in about how you can do the questions. And so she's going to give a bit of a rundown on that. Please do that now.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen one more time just so folks can see that. Just 1 second. And sorry about the delay there. So for anyone who wants to pose questions to the candidates tonight, on the bottom of your screen, after we're out of the share screen, you will see that chat icon, and you just click on that and type your questions into the chat. We have two volunteers who will be taking these questions, collating them, passing them on to Jeff, who will then pose them to the candidates directly. So we aren't accepting questions from the floor with people speaking them out, but we are accepting your questions over text. And again, if you have any challenges at all, please just text myself or Suzanne Sanger with the SCCA or Holly McNeil with the SCCA, and we'll do our best to help you.
Okay, thank you. Our intention tonight is to conduct a respectful and informative debate to give all participants a better understanding of the candidates' personal views and their respective party positions on tonight's theme. We were to have a pre-discussion on the starting order, but that didn't happen. So my suggestion is that we start with Mike, Avi, Doug, and Patrick for the first go-round. In the concluding comments, we'll reverse that order. And with each time that we have another question, we'll skip it. So the first one will be 1, 2, 3, 4. The second one will be 2, 3, 4, 1. The next one will be 3, 4, 1, 2 in that order. So that it really doesn't matter very much. There's no advantage to speaking first, last, or wherever you go. All the candidates will have 90 seconds for an opening comments. During the question and answer period, there'll be 90 seconds allotted to each person responding. Each of the four candidates has 3 30-second rebuttals, which they can use at any time they wish. But they're like cards in a game. When they're gone, they're gone. And if you have a fourth one you wished you had, well, then you shouldn't have used it up in an earlier moment. To assist the candidates in keeping time, when I reach the floor and pick it up, I will hold up a yellow card, which basically says you got 15 seconds left in your time. And when you got 5 seconds left in your time, I'll hold up the red card so you have time to finish the sentence. If you're If it sounds to me like you're almost done and you're at time, that's fine. If you start drifting over, there will be a beam from a spaceship that will lift you up and you'll disappear and you won't be around to hear the count on September the 20th. The questions, will start out with a section. There have been questions put forward from the Alliance for Democracy and from the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association. All the candidates have been sent those questions in advance. We'll alternate between the two organizations. When we finish that, will probably take us about 7 to 10 minutes, or the opening statement is 7 to 10 minutes. Those questions will take 25 to 30 minutes. About 8:45 or 8, we'll move to questions from the participants, the Zoom, and we'll get as many as we can as possible. At 8:50, regardless of where we're at, we'll ask the candidates to give a 1-minute closing remarks. And then at 5 to 9, we will thank all the people who made this possible. And finally, before we begin, I want to say thank you to all of the candidates running in this federal election from sea to sea to sea. Without people like yourselves putting yourself forward to the electorate for consideration, our representative democracy simply could not happen. So without any further ado, we're going to start with Mike from the Green Party. Mike's a documentary filmmaker. He's executive director of the BC Council for International Cooperation. He has served on the boards of the Sierra Club and the Canadian Environmental Network, and he lives in Gibsons. Mike, you've got 90 seconds starting now.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm actually not in the riding. I had to do an emergency visit to London. My sister had a heart attack yesterday. And so I've had actually a long time on the plane going overnight to think about just what kind of what does an emergency mean personally? And when do we change our activities and when do we jump on planes and just quit what we're doing because there's an emergency at hand? And the parallels between my own personal situation right now and climate change are unbelievable. Because I was talking to my sister, I said, well, all the signs were there. You know, all the signs of stress were there, just as all the signs of climate change have been with us for decades. But in our heads, I'm sure every single person in this audience tonight is fully capable of understanding that we're in a climate emergency. We're in a climate emergency. But how does it, and I keep saying this, and I've said this for the last week, and I'm surprised that it then almost hit home so clearly for me too, because I was saying, when do we feel it inside that we're actually in an emergency and we must act as if it's an emergency? And the thing about it getting a heart attack, the way I just talked to my sister, she's fine. She ripped an artery and she's going to be okay. But the thing is it requires a person then to go, I guess I do have to change, because you get those signs. And we've had those signs that are similar to planetary heart attacks, the smoke, the heat waves, the dead intertidal zones. And so I'm bringing that to the table tonight in a personal way, just to implore us. It is an emergency, and that's why I'm running.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go over to Avi. And Avi is also a documentary filmmaker. He was CBC's host of Counterspin and On the Map. He helped create the LEAP manifesto along with his partner Naomi Klein, and he lives in Half Moon Bay. And so we have, starting now, you got 90 seconds. You have to unmute.
Can you start my clock again?
I am starting your clock again.
Thank you. First of all, a big virtual hug to you, Mike, and terrifying news about your sister. And thank you for bringing us to that note of emergency. I'm here in a supporter's house in West Vancouver on the traditional and unceded territory of the Sḳwx people. And I come to this as a rookie candidate after a long career in public life. I come from a political family, as many of you know. I was probably asked if I was going to run for the NDP for the first time when I was in diapers, as my dad, Stephen Lewis, was leader of the Ontario NDP when I was a kid. And I also am entering this in a state of emergency. I'm feeling that it's not just the climate emergency. We live in a time of cascading, overlapping emergencies. We're in a housing emergency right here in this riding, which is responsible for a labor shortage and a lot of other social misery, and a poverty emergency, and an unnecessary toxic drug supply overdose emergency. And I see these emergencies as connected. We need big holistic solutions that solve multiple problems at once. We're out of time for silos and individual issue-based solutions. And the pandemic has reminded us what it's like, not just on a personal level, but on a societal level of what it's like when we live in a collective state of emergency. It's also reminded us that we're a rich country with immense capacity in the federal government to step up and make big change. That's precisely what we need right now for all the emergencies that we face.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to Doug. Doug is a retired mechanical engineer. This is his second time as a candidate for the People's Party, and he lives in Whistler, BC. Doug, the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be back with you again, even if it is because the Liberals have called an unnecessary snap election that will be the most expensive in Canadian history. I have the feeling that this Liberal gambit will not quite turn out the way the Liberals initially thought. My name is Doug Bibb, and I'm the People's Party candidate in this election. I apologize if I appear a bit weary tonight. The snap election call with a short fuse has left everyone scrambling, and that includes Elections Canada. But working a couple of weeks of 16-hour days has brought us to the point where most of our candidates will be confirmed. We won't know for sure for a day or two, as the Elections Canada cutoff was just today at 2 p.m. First, I'd like to clear the air by telling you what the People's Party is not. We are not a Nazi party full of goose-stepping racists. In fact, we are running candidates of all races, all colors, and all orientations. Back at the last election in 2019, this accusation came out of the blue, and we all thought it was because we had the audacity to publicly discuss immigration policy. We later learned that the origin was a mudslinger by the name of Warren Kinsella, who was paid over $20,000 a month by the Conservative Party of Canada to defame us. Pardon me?
Finish that sentence and you're done.
Yeah, okay. Kinsella and the Conservatives are now the subject of a defamation lawsuit brought by our leader, Maxime Bernier. I guess that's all.
Thank you very much. And finally, Patrick Weiler. Patrick is the incumbent MP, having first been elected in 2019. He's a lawyer with experience in environmental, Aboriginal law, and natural resource management, and he lives in West Vancouver. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I just want to also mention I'm coming to you today from my home on the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. And one nation that it just should also mention, Jeff, in the riding that not many people may know about, that is the Skszwx as well.
I know that.
So, actually, I'm the only MP that's visited there in the last 30 years. And I also, Mike, my heart goes out to your sister. That's really terrible news. But I really appreciate everybody joining on this call tonight. It's really impressive to see over 200 people tune in for this. For those that don't know me, I've been your MP for the last couple of years, background in environmental law. I've worked in BC and right around the world. The reason I got into politics were the unfair environmental laws that the Harper administration brought in when they gutted them in 2012. And from working in international development at a time where our country was an international pariah for doing nothing on climate change and being an impediment to global action. Since then, so much has been done in the last 6 years to improve environmental sustainability. We have a plan to protect 30% of land and waters by 2030. We've made significant progress. We've modernized environmental assessment. We went from being on track for 12% more emissions by 2030 to now, with policies and investments already in place, to be 36% below. And we're going to get to 45% below with the commitments we've already made in the last few days. I've been a key advocate in championing progress in many of these areas as your MP and as the chair of the Liberal caucus. And I look forward to diving into this as we get into this debate tonight.
Thank you all for being concise and to the point. So we're now going to move into the questions that are constructed by the Alliance for Democracy and the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association. We'll start with the first question from the Alliance for Democracy, and it is, given the importance of moving Canada off fossil fuel dependence, what policies and supports will your party put in place to spur rapid growth of alternative energy production and distribution and the training and financial support of displaced workers? And so we'll start with Avi.
Thank you. So first of all, I start from the premise that there's no government and no party anywhere in the world that is doing enough to rapidly transition off fossil fuels. It's absolutely clear that Canada needs a World War II level mobilization to build the new clean economy and repair our land and water and air and homes and schools and transportation systems. The NDP will slash emissions at least in half in less than a decade with carbon budgeting, i.e. hard caps, not cap and trade, just cap, hard regulations on industry, and an independent climate accountability office. Under the Liberals, we've seen a really despair-inducing discrepancy between the beautiful rhetoric and the really shameful record of being the only country in the G7 whose emissions are still rising after Paris. The NDP is the only party who you can trust to fight for working people, will create 1 million good jobs in rebuilding local economies, creating decades of good employment in the oil patch, as oil and gas workers safely dispose of 100 years of abandoned wells and toxic fossil fuel infrastructure. And unlike the Liberals, who spent $1.5 billion public dollars on that plan, which originated with some people behind the LEAP manifesto, we will make the polluters pay. We will take on corporations to reduce emissions fast and create a Green New Deal for all and shared prosperity instead of climate apocalypse.
Thank you very much. Doug, you're up next on the same question. Hold on, I'm gonna, you're muted, Doug. Doug?
There, okay, how's that?
Yeah, let's start over again. You were muted.
Yeah, that's fine, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, all of the questions tonight are on the theme of global warming. I'll answer these as completely as possible within the allotted time. For a more complete information that's not being provided by the mainstream media, I'd encourage you to visit my website at bebppc.ca under the climate tab. This URL is also on all my election signs. There you will find many videos, short and long, all made by PhD climate scientists. The best place to start there is with the short video by Dr. Richard T. Lindzen, Professor Emeritus from MIT with 30 years experience in atmospheric physics. There's really 3 questions that need to be addressed. The first is if there's actually warming going on, and there's no question there is. The level of carbon dioxide is going up as a result of burning fuels, and that again is not a controversial thing. The second question is what percentage of the warming that is occurring is actually caused by greenhouse gas? And on that question is about 50% split in scientific opinion. And the fact of the matter is these scientists have not been asked the most important question, which is, do we face an emergent crisis? That question, you're not going to find any sort of consensus. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. And that takes us to Patrick. And I reset. And same question, please.
Well, the first thing that I always bring up when we're talking about climate change is whether anyone in this call has actually read our Strength in Climate Plan. In the last debate we had, I asked the same question, and not a single person in the room raised their hand. And I don't blame them. It's 75 pages long, but I suggest you do. It's the most comprehensive climate plan our country's ever seen. It's well underway. It's one of the most comprehensive in the world, and it very much deals with alternative energy. And we're starting from a great place in Canada in that we have a grid that's already 82% non-emitting. But there's much more that we're going to need to do as we electrify our economy. And much of that needs to be that needs to fully be in renewable energy. And a lot of that's going to be working with our emerging clean tech sector in Canada. We have more companies in the top 100 in clean tech than any other country in the world. We just gave them a 50% tax cut so that more of them will be able to scale and grow and create the jobs of the future that we need to see here. We're focusing on electrical interties in between provinces, and we've brought in policies already to phase out coal-fired electricity by 2030, which has almost completely been eliminated in our country. And we've made the commitment to eliminate all fossil fuel electricity by 2035. and connecting areas with, like I said, that have clean electricity with those that don't. And we've committed to capping emissions from oil sands sector at existing levels and decreasing them over 5-year intervals. And we've already launched discussions on the just transition, and we've committed $2 billion to retrain oil and gas workers into green jobs.
Thank you. And now, Mike, reset. Same question.
Yeah, so the proof, I think, is in the pudding. If you look at British Columbia, it's under an NDP government and a Liberal government and a Conservative government before that, that we are now 27% above emissions when the rest of the world has somehow, like the United Kingdom, managed to pull it down to 45% below. The science is what we say in the Green Party is what we need to follow, not the politics of aspirations for whatever political aspirations you have. We have to actually follow the science. And I would say that there is plenty of evidence with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The world's most eminent body of scientists have come together and unequivocally said that climate change is real and irreversible. And the science says we must get to 60% below 2005 levels, and none of the other parties will do that. So we need to keep fracked gas in the ground. None of the other parties will say that. We need to keep no new fossil fuel infrastructure, period, needs to be built. None of the other parties are saying that. This is where in the Green Party, we're following the science every single time. And our policy is tagged to that, not the other way around. And that's critically important if we're going to get out of this conundrum. The final thing I'd like to say is that there are good ideas out there. I love some of the ideas that are coming from the other parties. And what we need to do is have that emergency climate cabinet, that warlike cabinet that is made up proportional representation in the cabinet, so that we actually have a cabinet that Canadians believe represents their views, tackling the most critical problem of our time, which is definitely climate change.
Thank you very much. The next question is from the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association with respect to forest carbon. The BC forest industry, including emissions from logging and forest fires, is our single largest carbon emitter, releasing over 82 million tons of carbon dioxide annually. BC forests also have huge capacity and potential for carbon sequestration. In fact, protection of old growth forests and restoration of deforested land is the only proven way to sequester large amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. In 2021, the Supreme Court of Canada determined that the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act is a matter of national concern and has limited constitutional impact on provincial jurisdiction. The ruling solidified the federal government's right to impose measures to cut GHG emissions and address climate change and biodiversity loss as in the national interest. The question is, if elected, what would you do within your party to protect old growth forests and restore deforested lands to reduce carbon emissions and mitigate climate change impacts? And we're going to be starting with Doug this time around. Doug, I think you're muted. There you go.
I was muted. This sounds very much like a question that came from another group. Was this just submitted now?
No, this is one you received. You should have received ahead of time.
Yeah, all right. I'll have to just think about that for a sec, because it wasn't on my list of questions. So I think the issue of the contribution of the forest industry in BC to greenhouse gas carbon dioxide is misplaced. I mean, why would you include carbon dioxide emissions from forest fires in the forest industry totals? That doesn't make much sense to me. Now, it might actually be reasonable to preserve old growth forests from a biology standpoint, but I don't think as much of a case can be made for preserving it on the basis of climate modeling that's not accurate and hasn't been for decades. I mean, there's reason for preserving biodiversity, but not so much for carbon dioxide emission. So we will protect the water that we drink, the air that we breathe, the soil that we grow our food in, but we're not going to jump on this carbon dioxide bandwagon to the extent that it makes serious changes to our prosperity for something that's yet to be properly determined. And I guess that's my time. Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. And that is Patrick's up next on the same question, please.
Well, it's very clear that we're not just living in a climate crisis. We're also living in a biodiversity crisis. And the last 2.7% of intact old growth forest in BC is our most critical area for species at risk, as well as carbon sequestration, which is to say nothing of the intrinsic and cultural value that it provides. And the continued logging of this precious ecosystem under the provincial NDP is reprehensible and it needs to stop. And that's why we're the only party with a plan to protect old growth forests in BC. We've committed to coming to an agreement with the province to protect this last remaining old growth and establishing a $50 million old growth nature fund to work with the private sector to leverage even more money to protect it. And this work is going to happen with First Nations, local communities, and workers on the path forward. In addition to this, we're focused on reforestation of lands with planting 2 billion trees, 30 million of which are already planted this year, and we're ramping up big time to make sure that we can make it there. And we've committed to protecting 30% of our lands by 2030. We've already protected the equivalent area of double Nova Scotia in the last 5 years. A lot of the programs we're going to be focusing on to do this will be Indigenous protected and conserved areas and working with Indigenous guardians programs. So if re-elected, these are the priorities that we're going to push for. And also we're going to be focused on mitigating wildfire risk by working together with First Nations traditional practices like controlled burns so we don't see the type of wildfires we saw this year.
Thank you. And Mike.
So the nature of our old growths is that they actually do. They are one of the most efficient ways that you can lock up massive amounts of carbon and keep that carbon standing over long periods of time because our old growth is so old, and that is its value from a carbon perspective. The question is excellent because it deals with the technical nature of how could a federal MP get involved in a provincial jurisdiction, because forestry is provincial. But here's the problem: we look at forests from a timber perspective, but if we looked at them differently, like Indigenous people tell us to, which is that they're whole systems, interconnected systems, biodiversity systems, they have existential value, carbon value. That allows us as feds to come in and say, this isn't just about timber volume, people, because you already screwed up timber volume, by the way, provincial NDP, and you're screwing it up in Fairy Creek as well. That's extremely disconcerting to anybody from a timber perspective, but from a biodiversity perspective, we can look at it, and that's federal.
Yeah, I agree.
We can look at it from a fisheries perspective, and even that's federal. Oh, I'm hearing something interrupting. Sorry. Anyway, something interrupted there. But basically, my point is that when we look at forests for the integrated whole systems that they are and realize that we don't manage forests, forests manage us because we're humans as part of those ecosystems. And if we took that holistic view, which is what we say in the Green Party we must do when we look at forest ecosystems, and used ecosystem-based management instead of just timber volume management, we would actually approach our old growth forests so differently. They would become the cathedrals of Canada that they are, because they're actually at this point a world resource. They're not even for us to cut down anymore. They're actually globally significant carbon reserves.
Thank you very much.
Sorry about was that me that interrupted there? There's something.
No, there was somebody off in the distance. It wasn't anybody on screen. So.
I thought that was at my end. I'm sorry.
No. Avi.
Thank you. I'm glad this question came up early, Patrick. I'm getting disturbing reminiscences of your prime minister, your leader, Justin Trudeau, in the way that you say beautiful and perfect things, and you've had 6 years and haven't taken a single bit of interest in the old growth forests. It's a little bit cynical right now to march in and try to create trouble for the NDP with $50 million and yet another promise. Look, my personal belief is that we can't be cutting down one more elder of the forest. There's so little left. There's absolutely no reason for it. The only reason for any harvesting whatsoever of old growth is, of course, for cultural and ceremonial purposes, and that's for First Nations to decide. I appreciate, Mike, what you said about the worldview, and this, in fact, is embedded in the province of British Columbia's old growth strategic review from a year ago, all 14 recommendations of which should absolutely be implemented immediately. And that review talked about the paradigm shift, that the old trees are absolutely the anchor of the life support system, and they cannot be seen as a commodity any longer. And that is absolutely the position that I take. The NDP has a $500 million Indigenous Guardian program that would create economic development pathways that are not an extraction. The forests and the fish are a zero-sum game where people are not being able not being offered any other economic pathway. And we must expand the circle of opportunity beyond extraction. That's the way out of these terrible wars in the woods.
Thank you.
Jeff, may I use one of my 30-second inter things? Is that how it works? Does it happen now or does it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to address that because the whole point that's going to happen here tonight is that Abby, you yourself have got a worldview that can understand that force, but you're whipped. Your party is whipped, and you're going to have to follow what they say. And same thing with Patrick. You guys are environmentally very keen and astute individuals, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to follow what your party says. And that's the same thing. How do you, Patrick? Your party bought a pipeline. That is something you have to face, and you're whipped to that. And if you are a person of conscience, why wouldn't you just step down at that point and go, they're fundamentally not listening to me? And the same about old growth logging, Abby, and the same about fracked gas, because your leader won't say no to fracked gas. And so you're both in trouble on that.
That's time, Mike.
We might have a number of rebuttals requested now. Patrick, would you like to go first?
Well, you get to use them whenever you wish.
I'd
But
like
remember,
one
when
too.
they're gone, they're gone. Okay, Patrick, 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the same thing, Mike, you brought up last time. I'm actually not whipped in my party. The only votes that are actually whipped for my party are ones that are campaign platform commitments and ones that are confidence motions. So you can look at my record. I've voted against my party several times, and I'll continue to do that because in order to protect or in order to serve the people that elected you, you have to be able to reflect the wishes that they have, and I've done just that.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to use up a rebuttal?
I would.
Okay, but Abby, you got a hand up first. Let me just reset the
Oh,
clock.
I'll cede the floor to Doug. We'll get it out of the way.
Okay.
We'll get it out of the way. Let's do that.
Doug,
Shall
go
we,
ahead.
Abby? So let me just first correct something here. The idea that old growth forests, or any forest for that matter, is the only avenue by which you can sequester carbon is just plain wrong. There's a number of initiatives to do with carbon sequestration, if that's your goal, in mine tailings, injections, all sorts of other ways to do it. So I'm going to reiterate my point that this idea that that's the only way to go is just phony. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to question number 3, and we're.
No, I did want to rebut actually, Jeff. I
Okay.
just thought I'd wait till the end.
All right, no, then you're going to be even at the end of this. Go ahead.
Fair. Mike, you've brought this up before. These are really deep and serious issues, and I don't think any party has a monopoly on wanting to respond to the climate emergency. And this isn't a game for scoring points. Yeah, there are differences of opinion within the NDP. That's legit. We're grown-ups. It's a big family, and there are discrepancies, and we have respectful disagreements. There are a lot of climate champions running for the NDP this time. We're going to have a climate caucus after this election, and we are going to hold the Liberals' feet to the fire if there's a minority, or we're going to run a real climate emergency response.
Thank you. Now we will move to question number 3, and this one from the Alliance for Democracy. Much resource development spurring the climate crisis occurs in the traditional territories of Indigenous nations who have little alternative but to accept corporate and government projects. How will your government help them create new models of sustainable economies? And we'll be starting with Patrick.
Great. Well, this is something I can speak personally to as someone who's worked in both environmental and Aboriginal law. And I can tell you we've completely changed how we do First Nations consultation and accommodation since I began practicing back in 2015. Under Harper, it was very much a box checking exercise where First Nations had the opportunity to blow off steam. And working with the private sector in many cases was a take it or leave it deal. We've had a few watershed moments since then. Of course, none more so than the bringing into law of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples just a couple months ago, which requires free, prior, informed consent, and things like Indigenous-led assessments, which are also enabled under our new Impact Assessment Act. I've had the opportunity to work on one for the Squamish Nation, which was one of the first ever done in BC and one of the world leading ones for on the wood fiber project, and that's precisely the direction we need to go. But one project or one One program I'd like to mention here is a project that happened at Clark Lake. It's a geothermal project. It's the first viable geothermal electricity production facility in Canada. It's wholly Indigenous owned, Indigenous led, and it was made possible with a $40 million investment from the Canadian federal government. And it's actually retraining people that were working in the oil and gas sector. So I think this is where we need to be going. This is what First Nations tell me is they want to be self-sufficient, and self-sufficient in energy is a key part of it. And that's why we're helping them get off diesel to do projects like that.
Thank you. And we're back up to the top with Mike.
Okay. Well, similar to this conservation association, I worked with the Amazon Conservation Association. And the idea there, and I learned a lot because we actually managed to get the largest Indigenous held land concession in Peru. And the way it was done was not by offering or telling Indigenous people what to do, but finding out from them what is it that they actually wanted. And when you hear what they want from land and resources, it's not often the money and economics that a petrochemical company will offer them, because they were offered that and rejected it. And I think many people, when I think about my experiences with the tall tan and so on, they get offered enormous numbers of mining projects. But when do we actually go and say, what would you like to do with your land? In what ways? And that's when people came back in, for example, and it was really quick. People said, we want to be able to farm, and we want to be able to have Brazil nut concessions and be able to live in the forest as we always have. And I think if we take that same attitude, not of offering you either a petrochemical company contract or nothing, we can say, what in your ideal world would you, as Indigenous peoples who this is unceded territory, it's your land, right? What would you want? And we then take away all of the perverse subsidies and offerings from the oil and gas sector, which are false economies. People get a boom and bust economy, and then their communities get a whole bunch of money really fast and then collapse again. You can see that all over northern British Columbia, and that's the last thing we want in our riding.
Thank you. And Ave.
Again, Patrick, I'm glad that you brought up the question of free, prior, and informed consent, because the way that the Liberal government is implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is missing that fundamental principle. If there were free, prior, and informed consent for Indigenous communities to all big projects on their lands, including pipelines and other energy projects, which is right at the heart of the NDP platform, we wouldn't see the Trans Mountain extension being forced through Sḳwx territory. We wouldn't see any of these pipeline projects forced through Indigenous communities. And so that centrality of free, prior, informed consent is really at the basis of the NDP's approach to this. And I'm very proud of that. According to the world-leading climate movement group, Indigenous Climate Action, this is just one way that enforcing Indigenous rights is in itself a climate solution. But it's not just in stopping these projects, there has to be an economic alternative. And I will return to that $500 million Indigenous Guardians program. Creating careers in Indigenous communities and development pathways that are not about extraction, but are about protecting nature, helping the earth heal, sequestering carbon. The zero-sum game of logging and fishing and other extractive projects just has to end. No community really has a choice when the old industries are the only jobs on offer. And the NDP is committed to a major public investment so that Indigenous communities can actually have economic development in protecting nature and not extracting from it.
Thank you. I got to compliment you all. You're all actually wrapping up within 2 or 3 seconds of 90 seconds. So keep it up. And Doug.
Yeah, I find myself strangely agreeing a bit with Patrick Weiler. I mean, the idea of cooperation and development is good. I think that's the way we need to go. And I think it's already happening, as Patrick pointed out. Many bands are partnering with resource companies for this purpose. Now, Avi, of course, wants to stop all pipelines, so he'll put every roadblock in the way, even with those bands that actually do want to benefit from some sort of development plans. And that, I think, is not very good for anybody, including our native populations. I must say now that I'm not an expert in this particular matter, and I've been trying to do that, to learn more. And at the Seixal Writers Festival, which we attend and sponsor, There's a woman by the name of Michelle Good who wrote this book here. And it's a good book. And it talks about the homes. And I had a chance to talk to her after the speech. And she told me that one of the biggest impediments is the structure of the Indian Act. And in fact, unfortunately, corruption within the bands themselves. Now we need, I think, some sort of a new legal framework to replace the Indian Act to move this to the point where Indians, natives are self-sufficient and fully participate in Canadian society. And that's it.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, we're now on to question.
Can I throw in a 30-second, because I can't let that go.
All right.
I have to say how deeply offended I am when I hear people say our First Nations as if we own them, or insinuate in any way that corruption lies at the heart of what's going on with our relationships with Indigenous people. I am stunned that our Indigenous people have been able to do as well as they have when you look at the history in this country, and when we see the hundreds of bodies that have just been pulled up, and we realize what we did in terms of the generation and how we've impacted all of the populations in British Columbia of Indigenous people. That's when we realize that this narrative that you've got there, I can't let it go. I just can't let it go. It's too much for me to hear. Sorry.
Appreciate that, but your time is up. Thank you. Okay, so now we're on to question number 4, and this one again from the South Sunshine.
I think Patrick wants a rebuttal as well, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff, can I get in here?
Right. Go ahead.
Great. Well, I just want to respond to something on free, prior, and informed consent. I think there's a bit of a confusion out there what that actually means. It means having a very, very meaningful consultation, and it's based on the nature of the right that's in mind. So that's what it means in legal terms. Just in terms of what's going to unlock development for First Nations, getting out of the Indian Act actually is something that's incredibly important. Self-government agreements, you look at First Nations that have been able to develop those, they can actually raise capital and develop local enterprise. And that really is what's going to unlock a lot of the future for First Nations and close the infrastructure and service gap. Okay,
are there other rebuttals? If not, we'll move on to question number 4 from the.
No, I've got a rebuttal. I just waved my hand.
Okay.
I'd just like to say that I think that Mike has misconstrued what I said. The issue of corruption is not unique to our native population, to their bands. It is endemic. It's a foible of humanity, and it exists to a large extent within our current Liberal government. This is something that we have to fight at all levels. And I think Mike Simpson knows that.
Okay, thank you.
May as well use up my last 30 seconds because it's a hot topic and I can't let it go. Look, I did a project on free, prior, and informed consent in Nigeria, and it was on reduced emissions through deforestation and degradation. And the key thing here is, do populations, are they in control of their resources, which are theirs, and do they have decision-making power? And this is what's gone wrong. What I'm saying is, you can't point to corruption when the entire system was flawed from day one for how Indigenous people are able to access and use their resources and have control over them, and to determine what they feel are the important things instead of just economic indicators. It might be access to stories, land, salmon, traditional foods. Those are all things that are more important to them in their cosmology necessarily than the bottom dollar money.
Thank you. Are there any others? Hearing none. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Species at risk. Species at risk, SAR, are the responsibility and jurisdiction of the federal government under the Canadian Species at Risk Act, SARA. The SCCA has been working to protect species at risk, including old-growth marbled murrelet habitat, for over 20 years. The BC government promised to develop the provincial species at risk legislation in 2017 to meet SARA requirements. It has not yet done so. The question is, if elected, what would you do within your party to ensure SARA legislation is enacted and remaining marbled murrelet habitat in BC is protected? And we're starting this one back up at the original order with Mike.
The key thing here is that we have lots of legislation in place, from the Biodiversity Convention to Species at Risk to the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 21. There are so many legislative ways in which we can enact if the government wanted to. And the problem is if you don't actually have enough conservation officers out there, if you don't have enough resources so that you can actually implement these pieces of legislation, then they aren't worth, they become very difficult to promote and to be able to have people actually pay attention. A person should go to jail. That it should be criminal in some of these cases to be actually killing species that are actually right on the edge. I did some of the first studies on marbled murrelets in Carmanah and so on. And when you recognize that there, and at the same time, people will log as if this isn't important. And it's happening right now on Fairy Creek. And at some point, what we have to do is actually just implement what we have already written down on pieces of paper. That's really critical, is to give government the power to implement.
Thank you. And Ave's up.
I'm happy to have this question about species at risk, in part because my 9-year-old is on a permanent monologue about the listing endangered species and their conservation status. It's literally all I hear all day long. I haven't seen my kid as much in the last couple of weeks, so it kind of makes me feel a little bit at home. The NDP supports a more aggressive and urgent enforcement of the Species at Risk Act, and time is running out for too many precious species. I believe the province's species at risk legislation needs the same urgency and support. It is important to remember that species extinction is connected to ecosystem health, it's connected to human society, it's connected to the climate emergency. Action is urgently needed, and we can't be looking at these linked emergencies in silos. They are absolutely connected. So the NDP is launching a 10-year nature plan to reverse species loss, protect oceans and freshwater, expand marine protected areas, which is urgent in this riding, and enact a national freshwater strategy, also urgent in this riding. The climate emergency is not the only one we face. We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction. It keeps me up at night as well, and we need holistic solutions to these interconnected crises. We also need government that is prepared to act. And this is something where I think Mike has put his finger on it. Enforcement is the missing piece of this equation. And it has to do with a government that is prepared to step up and actually regulate industrial interests, commercial interests, and make sure that people are taken care of, but that the planet is not left to die. And that balance is something that you can count on the NDP to achieve.
Thank you. Doug. You're muted.
Is it me again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me reset your time. Hold on.
I think I finally got this figured out here. There's
Okay.
2 sets of questions, one from Action for Democracy and one from the
Yes,
SCCA.
I'm going back and forth between the 2 sheets.
Yeah, I can understand now.
Okay.
Well, anyways, you know, I do applaud the efforts that
Your time starts now. Go ahead.
that's fine. I won't take long. I do applaud the efforts to protect species at risk. It's good. And, you know, when it comes to this particular question about the BC government not doing what they're said to do in 2017, that's really a matter to take up with John Horgan. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't be able to identify a marbled murrelet if I ever saw one. And I just don't know much about marbled murrelet, so leave it there. Sorry. Thanks.
Okay. No one's going to punish anybody for taking less time than they're allowed.
Yeah.
And Patrick, please.
So we know the world's confronting both the interlocking crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. Globally, we've lost over 2/3 of the world's wildlife populations just in the last 50 years. In Canada alone, we have 500 plant and animal species at risk of extinction, and marbled murrelets are just one of those species. And we have a 3-pronged strategy to bend the curve of biodiversity loss and to achieve our target of protecting 25% of Canada's lands and waters by 2025 and 30% by 2030. That means in the south, we're going to bring nature closer to communities, which includes the creation of new urban national parks, working with municipalities to build natural infrastructure. The north, where species largely thrive in abundance as part of intact ecosystems. In partnership with Indigenous peoples, we're going to continue to move forward with Indigenous protected and conserved areas, which will secure a way of life and nature. We're going to focus on protecting carbon-rich areas as well as biodiversity and old growth, which marbled murrelets inhabit are key among that. In mid-Canada, where extractive industries operate alongside some of our most iconic wildlife species such as salmon, grizzlies, and caribou, we're going to create networks of interconnected, protected, and conserved areas. But moving forward, in budget 2021, our government's committed $786 million for the protection of terrestrial areas of ecological significance. We committed an additional $340 million to work with Indigenous partners, the creation of ICPAs and the Indigenous Guardians programs. And if reelected, I'm going to push forward with implementing this work. And we're probably the only party that will actually push the province to enact a Species at Risk Act, which is largely overdue.
Thank you. And that takes us to the next question. Oh, I pushed it. I pushed the wrong button here. It says get ready for bedtime. I don't want to get ready for bedtime. This is too interesting. Okay, the fifth question is from the Alliance for Democracy. What is your party's position on the ongoing massive subsidies and financing, 18 billion in 2020 alone, being made available to the fossil fuel industry, and how will you hold the industry responsible for pollution of lands, water, and air? And for this question, we start with Mike.
I think that was the last one, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I was first last time.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, we're going to start with Avi because we wouldn't want to repeat the same mistake twice.
I'm delighted to have this question about subsidies. I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on you, Patrick, but you are the incumbent, and I think my kiddo's watching, and his version of your answer is, no, I mean it. This time we'll really do it. The Liberals have been promising to cut fossil fuel subsidies for probably as many years as my kid's been alive. The NDP will end all fossil fuel subsidies immediately. No excuses, just done. The party is over. And this, of course, is not enough. I believe the science is absolutely clear. And yes, this is a discrepancy between positions of different people in my party, but we cannot have any new fossil fuel infrastructure. And lots of NDP MPs and candidates have signed the Stand Earth Pledge, have signed the 350 Pledge, and I have been saying this for many, many years since the LEAP Manifesto and before. Even the International Energy Agency is now saying that we need, the implication of no new fossil fuel infrastructure is actually a managed decline of fossil fuels. The NDP is the only party you can trust to do that without throwing workers under the bus. We need to start taking care of workers, not the mega profits of corporations. And the NDP is committed to making polluters pay. That's why the NDP plan would take all the loopholes out of the Liberal carbon tax, where the biggest industrial polluters are perennially let off the hook. And the NDP would force polluters in the oil patch to clean up their mess. That's the law of the land. The NDP would enforce it, creating decades of employment for those very oil and gas workers, healing the land rather than further ravaging it. All that economic activity will come at the expense of the fossil fuel industry, projecting $60 billion of profits in the oil patch in just the next 2 years. The money's there.
Time. Thank you. And Doug.
All right. Well, I can tell you this, strangely, indeed, the People's Party agrees with removing subsidies from fossil fuel industries. And then we'd actually go much further. We'd remove subsidies from all crony capitalists. And these subsidies cause economic distortions and they lead to corruption. Wherever subsidies are offered, they end up abused and provide a conduit for kickbacks that corrupt our democratic process. And I could go into great detail about a number of these, and I think that the Liberals probably know about them all too. I just want to say that tonight I admire the rebellious spirit of the environmental movement. I really do. One such character is Patrick Moore, who I've come to know personally over the years. And his book again is this one here. And it turns out that the polar bears are in large numbers. They're recovered. The Great Barrier Reef is recovered nicely. The ice caps are growing. And I think we can look forward to a very cold winter. What we want to do in the PPC is protect the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil in which we grow our food. Now, my fear is that CO2 global warming alarmism has hijacked the environmental movement, will ultimately bring it into disrepute. Thank you.
Thank you. And Patrick.
Okay, so I first want to mention we're already getting polluters to pay in Canada. We've brought in a national price on pollution, which covers more emissions than any other country in the world, and it's going to be the highest in the world by 2030. That's how you make polluters pay, and now we're going to have that right across the country. Our government's made the commitment with our OECD countries to eliminate all inefficient fossil fuel subsidies by 2025, and we're on track to do so. But that $18 billion number is very, very misleading because it includes all things that will reduce emissions in that sector. It includes things like the wage subsidy, which went to all sectors as well. But the most egregious example to that study is the 1.7 million that went towards cleaning up orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. But that money came along with green strings. And we forced Alberta to implement a polluter pays principle going forward, because that is in provincial jurisdiction. But the climate doesn't care about these rules. We just need to stop the methane from leaking. And so that's exactly what we did. Some of the work that I've been focused on, and which has already borne fruit, is changing the policy of EDC. Export Development Canada is one of the biggest financiers of fossil fuel production internationally. And working with Minister Ng's office, we've changed that such that all new investments need to be consistent with Canada's climate plan. Moving forward, we're going to continue to phase out the last fossil fuel subsidies. We've already eliminated 8, but we're going to keep some, like those that said subsidy for Indigenous communities where they only have diesel until we're able to transition to greener forms of energy. But we're not going to turn off the lights in Indigenous communities until there's alternatives.
Thank you.
Can I have 30 seconds, Jeff?
You may have 30 seconds.
Patrick, it's unfortunate that you've chosen that $1.7 billion of pure corporate welfare to lean on, because that is a plan that came from independent researchers and the Reclaim Alberta project in Alberta. That was a polluter pays program. And when the Liberal budget had $1.7 billion, it was public money given to the oil and gas industry, and they didn't even clean up that many wells. That should be money that comes from the profits of oil and gas. And you folks gave it right to the companies, and they didn't even do the work with it. So it's an unfortunate example to choose.
Okay, where are we at? We're now at question number 6, and we will be, oh no, hold on. Mike, you haven't had a chance to speak on this question. I'm terribly sorry.
That's okay. So I put in my first, a person in Canada can put in an individual inquiry to the Environment Commissioner, and I put one in around 2002 about perverse subsidies. You know what the Liberal government said at the time? There's no such thing. We've never done that. There's complete denial. So I'm glad, Patrick, to hear now that the Liberal government is actually taking some steps differentiating. And by the way, there's a difference between a perverse subsidy, a full-on subsidy that everybody understands, and then there's called support. So if we actually take support to the oil and gas industry, which is above the board, not perverse, then you can get way higher numbers than 18 billion. And the other thing I would say, Avi, is very careful. You're throwing the 1.7 at Patrick, but I'll throw the 1.8 that the BC NDP has subsidized the oil and gas industry on. And that's actually pretty hard to swallow, right? 1.8 billion whilst claiming that climate change is important. And this is very important, because what I've been saying to everybody, and this is probably the only thing I'm going to agree with you on tonight, Doug, is that if we did actually level the playing field, alternatives do extremely well. Right now, renewables and solar, the price per watt beats all of the other ones. That's why it's taking off. That's why clean tech, there's 420,000 jobs in clean tech growing to 620,000 jobs by 2030. And there's only 128 in the oil industry. It's because it's a dead industry. The famous quote is this one: the Stone Age did not end for a lack of stones. And that's exactly what we're on. The oil age will not end for a lack of oil. Let's keep it in the ground, move to the other things, just level the playing field, and alternatives will rock the day.
And if I'm not mistaken, that was a quote by the chief Saudi oil.
It was.
Head.
An oil guy. Yeah.
So now we're on to question number 6, and we're going to be starting with Doug on this one. This is regarding salmon. This is from the Conservation Association. Fisheries and fish habitat are the responsibility and jurisdiction of the federal government. Over the last 60 years, salmon population in the Greater Sunshine Coast watersheds have declined by at least 90%. Many formerly significant runs have disappeared entirely. This is a result of overlogging, rising water temperatures, fish farms, and ocean acidification. The complete disappearance of salmon from Canada's west coast is increasingly probable if the federal government doesn't act to address this problem. The question is, if elected, what would you do within your party to mitigate climate impact on salmon and restore salmon habitat? And we start with Doug. Doug, you're muted again.
Click
Okay.
the wrong button.
Let's start over again.
That's all right. Well, I think you forgot to mention overfishing as a factor. And the claim of ocean acidification is just total nonsense. I have investigated this myself, and there's no experts who actually understand the CO2 balance between the atmosphere and the ocean. It hasn't been solved. In terms of pH, the oceans are basic. They're not acidic. And less basic does not equal acidic. Please note that the Great Barrier Reef has recently recovered nicely. And again, for a better understanding of this fact and many others, the so-called environmental catastrophes, I would refer you again to Dr. Moore's latest book, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. And just to give you a basic understanding of how this works, you know, if you got a soda pop in a can and it gets warm, it outgasses. The carbon dioxide goes out. So the same thing with the oceans. If you do have warming, the carbon dioxide will leave and go into the atmosphere. It's actually a cycle where it goes back and forth. It's not very well understood. And in fact, the idea that there's going to be some catastrophic runaway unstable situation with carbon dioxide because of warming is just not borne out by history, because there's been times geologically when carbon dioxide was much higher and the earth recovered on its own. This says that there's other factors at play that make the earth a stable place. If that weren't the case, we would never have lived to evolve. Okay.
Thank you. And Patrick on the same question.
Well, the single best thing we can do to mitigate climate impacts on any species is to actually fight climate change. And we're the only party that has a credible plan to do just that. But it's just one of many impacts we're seeing to salmon, whether that's development in riparian areas, whether that's overfishing, whether that's transfer of diseases from open net finfish aquaculture. There's a lot of different stressors they're facing, and wild Pacific salmon are iconic in BC for just about everyone, for ceremonial purposes, for our economy, and just about everything else. And we've been watching salmon decline for far too long in BC. And it's been one of the things that I've worked hardest on as your MP to make sure that we're going to arrest the decline, because we've lost almost 93% of some stocks since 1990. One of the things I've been able to do in my role as your chair of Pacific Caucus, our caucus of Liberal MPs in BC, is to get a $647 million recovery package for wild Pacific salmon that's going to actually be able to conserve and restore stocks. This is the largest recovery package for any species in our country's history, and now we're moving ahead with that. In addition to this, we've been doing some emergency work on the Big Bar landslide. And we've also created a new regional development agency for BC. For many of the folks that are going to be, their jobs are going to be at risk with this, we're going to be able to create alternative livelihoods right across the province. So there's so much more that we need to do, and we're going to keep especially fishers right at the center of this as well.
Thank you. Now Mike is the third speaker on this question.
Some great ideas, Patrick, and I have to say your predecessor, Pamela Goldsmith-Jones, has done an outstanding job of kind of trying to champion getting fish farms onto land, right? And these are all good ideas. What I would say about salmon are actually an excellent indicator species. Salmon and bears are used in the Great Bear Rainforest to tell us the overall health of the ecosystem. But exactly what you're saying there, Patrick, is that you can't save salmon just by a fisheries policy, even though you do need that policy, because the riparian zones and the estuaries, and there are all sorts of ways in which the whole system has to work for those salmon to be able to continue to come back year after year. And that requires an integrated approach. And what I would encourage everybody, even like the small groups that are trying to do a local stream, those collectively will help salmon, as will federal fisheries policy on stopping trawlers in the bycatch. And we have to be able to save salmon, not with one answer at this point, but with many different projects, everybody realizing that it's really a deep emergency for our fish populations. All of the major fish populations on the planet have now crashed, right? And we don't want to see our salmon go the same way. Look at the Ulakin. I mean, these were fish that have crashed completely on the North Coast and were a deep part of the culture of our West Coast peoples, the Grease Trail. And I've gone and been with the Haida when they're doing the Ulakin catch. Almost impossible to do that now. So what we have to do is take an integrated approach, as you're saying, with many different ideas. Any party, any group, anybody that's got a good idea on how to save salmon is good. And the local spit and taking that out is an excellent example of how we in our riding can get Chinook back in the streams and the estuaries. So that's a really good project.
Thank you. And the final speaker on this question is Avi.
Thank you, Mike. I have one of those really good ideas, and it's in the NDP platform, and the climate movement put it there. It's called the Civilian Climate Corps. You're exactly right. The streamkeepers are doing heroic work, and I appreciate that this is really linked to the climate emergency and this preservation of the salmon. There are streamkeepers who are lifting, there are fry flopping around in puddles where streams used to be. And there are heroic streamkeepers who are lifting them one at a time into buckets and taking them to deeper water. But there's half a dozen people out on a weekend. We need tens of thousands of people out under Indigenous leadership, taking that heroic local work to scale at speed. And that's the kind of Green New Deal plan that I'm really excited about, that we've been working on in collaboration and partnership with social movements and under Indigenous leadership for many, many years. Indigenous fishing rights also need to be protected, and that means standing up to commercial interests. And it means taking that work to scale and clearing those salmon streams and remediating watersheds and riparian areas and streams, and actually healing the land rather than further extracting from it. We also have to admit that there have been systemic failings in the DFO. They need to be addressed. Under Tory and Liberal governments, we have watched the decline of this species on which almost all other life depends, and it absolutely cannot continue.
Thank you very much. And now we have reached the moment where we're going to be going to questions from those watching the program. And we have a team of people about down in Gibsons. I'm in Pender Harbor. That's amazing technology. And so these are all questions that nobody, none of these candidates have seen it. I haven't seen it. So I'm going to my cell phone to get the first question. And it is, this is a compilation question put in by a number of different people. And that's how we set it up. If there were a number of people with overlapping ideas, they would be put into a composite question that hopefully fairly addressed the different points. So here's the question. Within the context of the climate crisis that we are in the midst of, the federal government continues to subsidize and expand fossil fuel infrastructure, further adding to greenhouse gases, climate instability, and runaway climate change. In 2020, the Government of Canada announced at least $18 billion in subsidies and public financing for the oil and gas sector. Will you commit, if elected, to ending all subsidies, public finance, and other fiscal supports for fossil fuels by 2022, including financial support provided through Export Development Canada, and redirect the billions of dollars being spent on this pipeline expansion toward renewable energy and conservation measures? How soon will you stop subsidizing tar sands expansion, LNG production and expansion, and a 300% increase the transmission capacity of the Trans Mountain Pipeline? Now, some of the earlier issues of this question were already addressed. So I would request of the four of you that you try and pick up on the points not earlier covered, so that the evening does it all. So this is the first question, and we're now going to start with Patrick. And because you don't see them before you, if anybody wants me to reread the question at any point, please go ahead. Patrick.
Great. Are we getting a minute and a half for these as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I feel like this question has mostly been asked already. So, I'll give the same answer here. I mean, we've made the commitment to eliminate all inefficient fossil fuel subsidies by 2025. 8 of those have already been eliminated right now. We do still have a few that are left, including those like providing support for First Nations living in remote areas where they're only, subsidies for diesel, where they don't have any other options for home heating. And we're moving ahead with things like, I think there's 80 projects right now that are underway to move them on to renewable energy. I mentioned before the work that's being done with EDC as one of the largest financiers of fossil fuel production internationally. That's going to very much change with the new policy that's brought in as of February this year, and one that I've been advocating very strongly on for some time. And that's going to have an incredibly large effect on mitigating emissions globally. I certainly agree that this is the direction that we need to move in. We're also undergoing a study right now with Argentina, a peer review study to look at each other's fossil fuel subsidies. And there's also no internationally recognized definition for what is a fossil fuel subsidy. So again, I take issue with that $18 billion figure. But I think it is necessary to actually work with polluters right now to reduce their emissions. And we've done that by completely bringing some pilots to completely decarbonize cement, aluminum, steel. And I think that's exactly where we need to go, because otherwise we're ignoring our biggest point sources, and we're going to greatly, it's going to greatly impact our ability to make action on climate change.
Mike, same question, please.
Sure. Well, let's not ignore those point source polluters, because the biggest concern we have, in my opinion, is the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Energy return on investment for the Trans Mountain Pipeline is a shocking 3 barrels for every barrel. It takes a barrel of oil to take 3 barrels out of the ground. Normally, it's like 25 barrels. Think of how dirty and inefficient that oil is. It's catastrophic for the planet. And your government didn't just declare a climate emergency. 3 or 4 days later, they state they're going to buy a pipeline for $4.5 billion, which then costs $7 billion, which then costs $12 billion, which now is costing $22 billion. And it's incredible to me that we would take the world's dirtiest oil, ship it, dangerously ship it across, and then feed it out as clean gas, and then sell the public that somehow that's paying for climate change, when the fundamental thing that every person who knows their science knows, we've got to keep that carbon in the ground. And the NDP won't say no to fracking. It's shocking to me that Jagmeet Singh just recently said he would he's considering keeping the Trans Mountain Pipeline. You're standing up and you're fighting for climate change, and you're claiming the NDP is on side with climate change, and you're going to keep that same pipeline? Nobody internationally wants that pipeline. It's not just Canadians. Internationally, at the climate talks, people are saying, keep that oil sands stuff in the ground. That bitumen is incredibly dirty. It's the dirtiest thing we can do other than coal. So we're not, what I'm saying on this is we've got to actually, don't tell me that you're going to stop a diesel generator, because a diesel generator on reserve land somewhere is not the issue. It's the massive amounts of unconventional oil that we're spewing into the atmosphere because we bought a pipeline. And that's it, that we can't do that.
Time. Thank you. Avi.
So the answer is no, the NDP would not end all fossil fuel subsidies by 2022. The NDP would do it immediately. And that is one place where the party has been absolutely crystal clear. And this platform goes much further than any other NDP climate platform has ever gone. There's a whole of government approach that includes the financial sector. And again, it's comforting words to hear Liberals talk about the Export Development Corporation. We've had 6 years in which the Export Development Corporation has been massively subsidizing the export of fossil fuel products from Canada. Again, the words don't actually change it. It's the courage to take on the most powerful industry in human history and actually do the right thing. The NDP climate platform has a specific focus on the financial institutions, the Bank of Canada, the Export Development Corporation, and one that hasn't been mentioned, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. Our public pension is up to its eyeballs in toxic fossil fuel assets, is going on a spending spree with fracking in the United States and elsewhere. And the NDP platform very clearly says that the mandate of all those financial institutions will be changed to be in line with dramatic emissions reductions. So that's a really important thing. And I just want to, I get worked up about this. I know I get really, really passionate. Right now, there's millions of people in Louisiana who have no power. 16 years after Katrina, I was down there 10 days later after landfall when the city was still underwater. This has been going on for a long time. We've been hearing pretty words for a long time. We need action now.
Thank you. And the last speaker on this question is Doug.
Yeah, thank you. Just listening to all the other candidates, there may be a power outage in Louisiana. There's a bunch of people froze to death in Texas because they put too many windmills in and they couldn't actually run them when the wind went down. And so Alvy seems to have ducked out here. I'm interested also, first of all, to answer the question. Yes, we would eliminate subsidies on fossil fuel industry, along with the rest of the subsidies I mentioned earlier. The decarbonization of cement is an interesting question that Patrick raised. Very few people know that about 5% of CO2 emission actually comes from the calcining of limestone in the production of cement. Now, the issue of these birds, well, actually, you know what? Let me say that a few factoids. The IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has been referenced here several times, made the following statement. And they said, the prediction of future climate states is not possible. And elsewhere, they said that their reports are not suitable for setting public policy. You can read about this yourself. Now, as to remediation, the NDP and the Greens don't have a workable plan. If you really want to reduce carbon dioxide, you go nuclear. They don't want that, and I'll talk about this later when I wrap up. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're now on to the second question.
Can I challenge this one?
Yes, you can. Your third and final rebuttal.
Great. Well, I just want to correct the record on something. If people are thinking building the Trans Mountain Pipeline is going to lead to some runaway increase in emissions, that's simply not backed up by the facts. Our environmental assessment requires all new projects to show how it's consistent with our climate plan. And we've committed to a cap on oil sands at existing levels and steadily declining. So that is very much a red herring argument to make. And I do think when you're talking about removing all fossil fuel subsidies, it is those critical ones that we will need for off reserve remote First Nations. And also it's ignoring our biggest emissions, and we need to reduce those emissions right now. Otherwise, we're not going to meet our targets.
Thank you. Okay. And here's question number 2, and this is with respect to transportation. On the Sunshine Coast, we're facing a need for a better transportation system. Our local road is becoming inadequate. We hear demands for a new 4-lane highway with more single cars, but with an urgent need to shift into truly sustainable transportation. Would you support alternatives such as rapid electric bus lane with many buses and dedicated bike lanes that would encourage large numbers of electric bikes and microcars? Some European countries already have such developments. With the $1 billion a new highway would cost, what else would you look at doing and when? Thank you. That's from Graham Walker. So we're starting with Mike.
Okay, well, build it and they will come is what I figure. So if you build massive, like I just drove down the 401 today to get to the hospital here. And if you build that and then you allow all the cars and so on, that's where society goes. If we look at Europe or if we look at other models, we can see they built trains. And so people get on trains. And so what we've been saying in the Green Party is actually, why would we not massively reinvest in train infrastructure? Why would we not massively invest in electric car infrastructure and actually envision the world that we want? And the other thing we talk about, because these things are linked, it's not just transport, but why were you moving in the first place? Why are you commuting to work? Why are we not building livable communities where people can live and work and where people can age in place, particularly our elder population? They say over and over on the Sunshine Coast, we want to age in place in affordable houses. And we want to be able to get on a bus, not drive a car necessarily, or just walk. And so if you look at some of the models that people are experimenting with in other countries, where they've taken whole cities, for example, and just shut all the traffic down. And it may seem radical to us, but it actually does work because people can walk around. And so this idea of actually envisioning where we want to go and then building the future that we want is at the heart of the Green Party vision, which we call Mission Possible. It's the idea that it's not all bad news. Shift, hold your vision, and then achieve the buildings and the kinds of buildings that we want. And that it's not necessarily a 4-lane highway. It could be a bike lane.
Thank you very much. And we now go to Ave on this question.
I think Doug is asking for a rebuttal. I don't know how you want to handle that.
Were you looking for a rebuttal, Doug?
Yeah, I just want to say
Hold on,
that,
hold on. Let's, no, go ahead. Go ahead. If this is,
do I have any rebuttals left or am I all out?
this is your last one.
Okay, that's fine. Well, the whole idea of walking everywhere works okay, if you have tightly spaced cities. I think that Mike is making a big mistake here in assuming they can impose the European model on Canada, where there's great distances between the centers, and the system just won't work in a cold climate. So,
Okay,
30
thank you.
seconds.
Well, close enough.
Close enough, yeah.
Yeah, we're all friends here. Doug, you're up next to answer this question. Are you?
I think is it me after Mike? What's the way it was before?
It was Mike, Avi, and then Doug. You were to answer this question next when you were wanting as a rebuttal.
Yeah.
You know what?
I didn't do mine, Jeff. You want to let me go and then Doug can have his turn?
Yes, you're right. I wrote the number down ahead. I got myself.
We have a traffic jam on the transportation question.
All right. Well, that's fitting.
You ready for me?
Yes, I am.
All right. I love this question, Graham Walker. You're a genius for asking it, and you've answered a lot of the question in your question. This is what we call a Green New Deal, and this is precisely what we need. We need a Green New Deal. We need to do this at scale and at speed. Greyhound went bankrupt this past season, and the federal government had no answer, no solution. We need electrified public transit within communities and between communities, and we can create gigantic numbers of jobs in what was previously the automotive sector by doing mass transit electrified immediately. There's nothing stopping us except a government with the vision and the drive to actually solve these problems at scale. The Sunshine Coast Highway is terrifying when you look at the number of bikes and increasingly e-bikes that are unprotected on a shoulder. And there do need to be improvements on that road. And people need non-car options to get around the coast and many rural areas. It's going to look different in different places. And it's true that urban solutions don't work in rural communities, but we can absolutely have a thriving industry, good unionized jobs in our communities, building the clean transportation of the future. That's a Green New Deal for transit, and we need to start right now. There's a company making batteries for ferries in Richmond and selling them to Scandinavia. We need to electrify our ferries, have a lot more of them so that I have more options to get home tonight. And so would you. And this is all part of a Green New Deal for transit. We need it urgently.
Time. Thank you. And now I won't write it down ahead of time. Doug, now you've got 90 seconds on the same issue.
90 seconds doesn't last very long these days.
It does not.
No, but as long as a liberal budget, right? Well, now, my personal opinion anyway is that public transit's a good idea. And I think we should do that. Somebody mentioned $1 billion for the Coast Highway. I was up there in 2019. I had made a contribution to a guy that actually moved away. He was trying to lobby to have that highway put in, an extension from the top of the ferry, past Sešalj. He called the road a goat path. So if it cost $1 billion, and this election cost 600 million, they could have built that thing, the Roberts Creek by now for the same amount of money. And the 300 billion was spent, or 400 billion or 100 billion more a year. Money has no more meaning to the Liberals. It's got to the point now where we're going to have some serious inflation as a result of their profligate budget spending. Yeah, I guess that's about all I have to say on that. Oh, by the way, I should say that, if you're going to have public transit, good thing, but, you get electric cars and they have to go on roads. And so you're going to have to figure out how you're going to put all these cars that's going to have the same sort of traffic jam and issues that you have with internal combustion engines. So again, we see both the NDP and the Greens with unworkable plans.
Thank you. And finally on this question, Patrick.
Well, thanks for the question. And I just want to correct a couple of things. When Greyhound shut down in Western Canada, actually about 4 years ago, the federal government stepped up and it promised to co-fund any line that would be shut down. And actually that's how the Bus North line is being funded in BC. But it was the only line that the province took up for that funding. And actually, it would have been great if they took it up, because we would have had regional transit in the Sea to Sky, but that's a whole other matter. And also on a battery for ferries of our size, it's completely unworkable. I mean, maybe we have options for hydrogen, but a battery of that size wouldn't just simply not be practical. The federal government right now has an infrastructure program with the province. We do not fund highways. That's an area of provincial responsibility. But the last 6 years, we've invested over $18.5 billion in transit, which is 13 times more than the Conservatives did. And also something that I'm quite proud of is we launched an active transportation strategy last month. I ran a consultation with many folks, including Miyuki, who I know is in the room right now and has been doing some excellent work with the PAC in Langdale. And we're actually building it right now in Seixalt. We have a $3.2 million project that I was able to announce just a couple months ago that's going to literally encircle all of Seixalt with multi-use path. And we have another one we're building on Bowen right now as well. And this is the type of infrastructure that's going to make people feel safe getting out there on their bike, getting active, reducing our emissions, reducing congestion. I absolutely agree, Graham. That's the way we need to go.
Thank you very much.
Can I have 30 seconds, Jeff?
Sure. And then all of you will have used up your rebuttals.
I wanted to end the suspense. It was getting stressful for others. I think this is a perfect example of somewhere we can really highlight a fundamental ideological, philosophical difference in approaches. The Liberal government and federal governments for decades now, the austerity decades, has retreated from funding every public good. In the war, when Canada stepped up to confront the existential threat of fascism in Europe, if the private sector could do it, they did it. If they couldn't, the government created 28 new crown corporations to do it. We need operation funding for transit, not just capital spending. It shouldn't be a third and a third and a third. The federal government has the resources to solve these problems, and it has to step up and do it.
Thank you. Okay, and so now we're going to start the next one. Where the hell are we? Have we done all four of you on this question? I think we have. Okay, so the next question is, wait for it. So we're going to start this time with well, that was a rebuttal. That's why you confused me, right? I'm saying, oh, you just spoke. Okay, here's the question regarding West Coast Canadian ports. West Coast Canadian ports have progressively become the only export ports available to Western US producers of thermal coal. Over the last decade, US coal exports have progressively increased and are now at record levels exported through BC ports. Thermal coal is one of the most significant emitters of CO2. What is your party's position on a progressive curtailment of access leading to a complete limitation of access to, by 2024, to BC ports for the export of US and Canadian mined thermal coal? And we're starting that one with Avi.
If we want to slash emissions at least in half in less than a decade, coal's got to go, just like other fossil fuels. And we need to start taking a much more realistic, scientific, and holistic approach to emissions. We can't be shipping our emissions elsewhere. It's staggering to think that the emissions that we've seen rise under the Liberals, under Liberal and Conservative governments for decades now, don't even take into account the places where the fossil fuels are burned, as if we mine and produce fossil fuels and export them, they just disappear when they hit a border. The downstream emissions have to be counted, and we need that's why we need much more aggressive emissions reduction. Coal can't flow through our ports, no matter where it's coming from. It's a fossil fuel that has to be retired immediately. But there are workers in those ports, unionized workers that need those incomes. And you can count on the NDP to put the interests of working people first. Since my grandfather's time in the 1930s in the CCF, the NDP has been the party that puts the interests of working people first. So you can count on the NDP to reduce emissions dramatically on a science basis based on the science without throwing workers under the bus. And that's going to be how it works in those ports. And that's going to be how it works in the oil patch. And that's why you need a party that is going to fight for workers in the way we make this great change that the earth is screaming at us to make.
Thank you. And with the same question now to Doug.
Well, I think that Avi has it completely wrong. Shipping our emissions elsewhere does not occur with the export of coal. That coal burned elsewhere will be supplied by somebody else, and it's going to hurt the very workers that Avi seeks to protect, or at least claims to. If you're worried about shipping our emissions elsewhere, you might want to consider the fact that we've outsourced all of our production in this country to places like China, where there's very little environmental regulation. And so the coal is burned there. And by the way, they're building hundreds of coal plants in China. And if we stop shipping our coal, they'll source it somewhere else, Australia, elsewhere. There's hundreds of years of coal supply around the world. And again, we see the destruction of Canadian prosperity with an unworkable plan by people like Avi and Mike Simpson, who really don't understand world economics. It's just, it's pathetic, really. That's all I have to say on that.
Okay, thank you. And Patrick, you're up on the same question, please.
Great. Well, phasing out coal is the single most important thing we can do to reduce climate or greenhouse gas emissions in Canada and right around the world. And that's why we brought in, back in 2017, a commitment to phase out all coal-fired electricity in Canada by 2030. Most of that work is actually already done. It's also incredibly harmful for the smog that affects people and their health. And there's been studies that show that by Health Canada that show that it costs us $100 billion a year or more in terms of the health impacts from fossil fuels, just on people's respiratory impacts. So, but with what we've announced in our platform just actually yesterday, we're going to phase out all unabated coal-fired electricity by 2030 and no longer approve any new or expanded thermal coal mines. And we're going to be, as part of the Moving Past Coal Coalition, which is something Canada has been leading as part of the G7, we're going to end all exports of thermal coal from and through Canada no later than 2030. So this is a really important step to make. And I know even people that are in the business are already looking ahead at this. I recently read an article that Jim Pattison, who owns much of the facilities in the Port of Vancouver, he's already looking at this, and he's already been able to transition a lot of that into potash. And this is what, part of our just transition plan is going to look like. And we've already put forward the funding for those workers that are going to be affected to ensure that no one's going to be left behind.
Thank you. Mike, you're the final speaker on this question.
First of all, Patrick, I'm very encouraged to hear that we will phase it out. And my only request is that if you do get into government, that you do everything you can to actually do that, because there's been a lot of plans and they haven't come through, and we've missed 9 emissions targets. The bottom line here, folks, is that we can talk about who's going to do this and who's going to do that. We have to keep that coal in the ground. I'm with the other speakers on this. And we have to do the accounting as if it's a global game, not a Canada versus China game, because nobody wins. Absolutely nobody wins planetarily. This is a planetary problem. And we actually are going to have to fight this. I look at some of these issues that we throw out and we say, we're going to get this target. And I look at it and I go, this is going to be so difficult to do. But if we can get into the mindset where we cooperate with each other, where if you have a good idea, Patrick, I'm willing to support it. And same as you, Avi, we've got to start going, how do we find the good ideas? This is going to be so hard to do, the transition, and to do it justly and fairly so that people can keep jobs, keep wages, and so on, and we can make the transition to renewables. And some of the things is it's going to be full cost accounting. For example, right now, aviation and shipping are not included in emissions. And the Green Party is one of the only people that stands up and goes, you know how much oil and gas and emissions are coming out of those two industries? And they're coming out in the worst place that you could actually pollute, which is into the atmosphere. There's 10,000 planes in the air every day. Every moment. Every moment there's 10,000 planes in the air, and we're not counting those emissions. And you can see that the calculations at some point in the climate science, when you sit down, and I've been to the meetings, the scientists sit down, they go, we got to stop the politics, Because if we don't get fair and honest with each other and say, I need your good ideas, I need your good ideas, let's come together. And I think that's the one thing that you can count on tonight from a Green Party perspective, is we'll allow good ideas from all parties. Well, and if you got a good one, we'll good, but we'll also hold you accountable, because you can't stand up and say, we're going to do this and then allow for fracked gases or build a pipeline. We have to stop that conversation and get serious about, and the only real emissions target, by the way, is not half. The science is 60% below 2005, or we don't make it. So that's the conversation we want to have, is how to get there, talk to everybody, private sector, nonprofits, stream keepers, conservation societies, everybody together to figure out how we're going to do this. It's not easy.
Okay. We have, I think, time for probably one more question. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative, because the next question up, you all covered bits and pieces of it with respect to green jobs. So we're going to move on to, this is a two-part question. Do you agree that Canada should increase its existing commitment under the 2015 Paris Agreement and agree to cut our emissions by at least 50% by 2030? And the second part is, what accountability measures would you suggest in order to ensure we achieve those targets? How soon will you make public your opinions on the above? So we are starting this one with Doug.
No. In fact, the People's Party of Canada would withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement completely. The idea that we can reduce our carbon emissions here in Canada, which contribute a very small fraction of the global emissions, and somehow that gesture of goodwill is going to convince the Chinese to follow suit, is absolutely misguided. The Chinese are building hundreds of coal plants, so did India, and we could cut our emissions to zero here and it would not make any difference. Well, it'll make a difference because we'll manufacture nothing and import everything. And so no, we're not going to advocate for the Paris Climate Agreement. We're going to withdraw from that, and a number of other UN programs that are quite destructive to Canada. I'd like to go into more detail about the People's Party plan, but there's no time with a focus here on the environment to do that. So I can only encourage you to go on the websites, look at our policies, and realize that we're the only alternative, sensible party in Canada. 15 seconds left. Okay, yeah, that's about it for coal plants. I mean, these things are very misguided. I'll take it up again later when I close. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Patrick.
Well, one thing I do want to mention on the second point of this question is Canada recently passed the most progressive piece of climate legislation in our country's history just 2 months ago, which is the Net Zero Accountability Act, which requires Canada to both set ambitious targets that are consistent with the science, to have a detailed plan of meeting those targets, and to report on it regularly, transparently, some independent reporting, and to also have a detailed dive into all government operations. So this is a piece of legislation that's going to allow Canada to be accountable to actually meeting its targets. So none of this stuff where the Conservatives would set a climate target with no plan to actually meet it. And with our new climate plan, we have exactly what we're going to need to get there. It's the only credible climate plan on offer in this election. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Andrew Weaver, the former head of the BC Green Party and a renowned IPCC scientist. Our plan, is comprehensive, and then it touches on all aspects of our economy. And it's going to do that in a way that's going to create jobs, and it's going to create, especially in the green economy of the future, where we already have more jobs in clean tech than in the oil and gas sector. So, there's always more that can be done. And I'm absolutely a champion for doing just that. And I would say that the plan that we have rolled out is very conservative in some of its estimates. And maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Mike, please.
So in 2000, you're going to remember that the Paris Accord was written in 2015, and for every year that you wait, you actually have a larger target to achieve. So if you start out and you say, we're going to reduce by 50%, if you wait too long, now you have to reduce by 60, 70, even more percent, because time is not on our side. And we're going straight to 3.5. Right now, these are called the INDCs, the intended nationally determined contributions. It's a technical term for how much each country will actually contribute to try and get the overall emissions down so we don't exceed our carbon budget. That's technical talk for basically, if you don't slow it down soon, then you'll have to slow it down way more later. So when you, Patrick, say you're going to meet the targets and that the pipeline will work, what you've done is you've shifted the target. You see, you're talking 45%, but right now we have to hit 60, wait another year or two, and we're going to have to hit 70, maybe even more, because time's running out. So the longer we wait and we don't implement plans, and you've had 6 years to implement plans, so have the NDP in British Columbia, we need people to implement plans now, desperately now, so that those percentages don't continue to rise. We're the only party right now that we will lock our emissions targets to the science. And the science is absolutely clear on this. We have to hit 60% or more. And the INDCs, by the way, are going to be much more difficult for developing countries who don't have the privileges of the systems already set up and so on that we do, like hospitals and roads and all that. They want those things which are carbon intensive. So we have to give them a bit of a break on this, because we've been the carbon pigs of the planet. Up until now, we're the highest consumers of energy on the planet in Canada and the United States.
Okay. And Ave, you're last in this question, and we might be able to squeeze in one last question if we keep your answers to maybe 30 seconds plus. Let's try doing that. Ave, you're up.
So this is another place which I think crystallizes a difference between the Green Party approach and the NDP approach. Yes, the Green Party has a more aggressive target right now, but they're both utterly inadequate. If you talk about the science and the science and the science, we need to talk about justice. Canada has a historical responsibility for the carbon that we've emitted, and we have the industrial capacity and the wealth as a country to do much, much more. We owe a gigantic climate debt to countries in the global south that are on the front lines of the crisis, are experiencing the worst impacts of the climate emergency, and we have over-contributed to that global problem. And so when we talk about cutting our emissions at least in half or 60% in less than a decade, that doesn't even take into account our climate debt that we owe. And that has to be significant transfers of hard financial resources and technology in order to acknowledge the crimes of the climate emergency that have been visited largely on populations in the global south by the industrial economies of the global north. The NDP plan is not based on incentives, market mechanisms, and carbon taxes and faith in the private sector. It's based on hard carbon budgets and government regulating corporations to a hard limit. And the climate accountability bill that the Liberals brought in had 10 years to wait before the first report on any progress. It was the NDP in committee and in the minority government that put the only teeth that's in that Climate Accountability Act, and it didn't have the carbon budgets that are necessary to actually reduce emissions at the speed we need to. So we've got some huge problems with climate accountability. The NDP platform will solve them.
Time. Okay, we don't actually have time to even slide in another one. Thought we might be able to make it, but we aren't. So we're going to have a 1 minute closing remarks from each of the candidates. And as we said at the outset, we would reverse the order. Therefore, we will start with Patrick, Doug, Avi, and Mike, and then we'll do our respective thank yous and wrap up for the evening. So with that, Patrick.
Thank you. Well, I want to start this closing by mentioning a notable absence from this discussion, and that's the Conservative Party. I think this is exactly playing into the Conservative Party's hands to have all the progressive parties fighting at each other and debating each other's policies and not actually putting their plan forward, because their plan is a Harper year plan, and it's exactly that we don't want to go back to. One of the key issues in this election, the foremost issue, is absolutely going to be climate action. We're the only party that has a credible plan to fight climate change. The Greens have a very ambitious target, but with no plan that I'm aware of yet. The Conservatives want to roll back the targets with no plan. The NDP has a target, but its plan is just 12 bullet points. We have a detailed, costed, third-party verified plan that's been endorsed by the leading climate experts in the country. I mentioned Andy Reaver, Tom Mulclair called it marvelous. Mark Chicard said it's the best one on offer. And our platform is going to go even further. We can't roll back on this. We need to continue making progress. We don't have any time to wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug.
I find it interesting that Patrick refers to the People's Party as progressive. It's very encouraging. I can say quite clearly that there is no credible climate plan that does not include India and China. It just doesn't work. And so if you're serious about that, you better do that on the international scale. And to sacrifice Canada and our prosperity on the altar of the CO2 fraud is a huge mistake. It's a monumental blunder. With a bit of time here, I'd like to tell the tale of two birds. First set of birds lands in a tailings pond up in Fort McMurray. It's covered with oil and dies. Tragic. And yet all these Hollywood types fly up in their private aircraft, and they don't even mention the fact that there's decapitated raptors that are killed by windmills, and they got signs to watch out for falling objects. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Ave, you've got your final 1 minute, please.
I'm getting into politics, not because I want to go and live in Ottawa. I'm not particularly fond of Ottawa. I know that we need big change. That's why I'm doing this. And I get that people are afraid of change. We've been through hell. Indigenous communities, most of all, fire, heat dome, unmarked graves, wave after COVID wave. But we have to remember, if we keep doing the same thing, we don't get stability. We end up somewhere radical and terrifying. If we want big change that we know we need, it's time to vote for it. I've got the endorsement of David Suzuki and Bill McKibben and others in the climate movement because they know I can go to Ottawa and shake things up. I've got the national profile and a history holding these guys, and they're mostly guys in Ottawa, to account. I don't think that we have time for more words. We need big change. This election was cynical, and we need to make it a reckoning. And since the time of my grandfather, we have not had a federal NDP government. Let's try it. Let's see if we can get the big change that we need.
Thank you. And lastly, and definitely not least, Mike.
Thank you. Well, people have been asking me, what if you don't win, Mike? And I keep saying to people, we've already won in the Green Party, because look at the discourse. Look at tonight at what everybody's talking about. Look what the media in this riding are talking about. They're saying it's a climate change.
Mike, you're
muted yourself, Mike.
God, I almost sound better if I'm muted, don't you think? What I was going to say is that in this election, people have asked me, what happens if we don't win as the Green Party? And I said, well, we've already won. Because we were talking about this stuff. I was reflecting with Elizabeth yesterday at a fundraiser that, 25 years ago, Elizabeth and I were walking around with pamphlets that said there will be 3 times the number of forest fires. And at that time, it was hard to talk about climate change. And now look at it, it is dominating this election, dominating the conversation and the discourse in this riding. And all of the other parties are trying to shift towards the green t-shirt. And I keep saying to all of you, just come wear it. Just come and take my t-shirt and wear the green. If you want to talk green, we've been talking about all of these things, renewable energy. We've been talking about everything we've talked about, from climate change to renewable energy, for 25, 30 years. And it's great in a sense that is now the dominant discourse. And in that sense, I already feel like the Greens are already winning. We're winning. And imagine what would happen if you got us into Parliament, because the next stage is to take all of our ideas and combine them so that we're unified in our political discourse towards the same goal.
Thank you.
By the way.
In fact, thank all 4 of you very much. You've provided an excellent evening. I think everybody's learned a lot, both about you as people and about your party policies. And it's been a terrific evening. We want to thank all of the Zoom participants who are online. And I don't know if we have an update count on 192 are still, I don't know what the peak was, but right now, after 2 hours, we still have 192 people. I apologize to all those people putting questions that we didn't simply have time for. Finally, before we say goodnight, I want to thank the Alliance for Democracy and the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association for organizing tonight's debate. And in particular, these things don't happen out of the blue. I want to say thank you to the hard work of individuals: Craig Cochran, Barb Bulmer, Bette Cecil, Naomi Fleshut, Leanne Johnson and the SCCA board, Holly Neat, Gail Nielsen, Gail Riddell, Suzanne Senger, and George Smith. My name is Jeff Keithley. Please make sure you vote on or before Monday, September the 20th, and please encourage others to vote. Good night, and thank you all.